This section, we will have a brief introduction about the Multilateral Trade Regulation System, the WTO. As the only international organization dealing with the rules of trade between nations, the World Trade Organization, WTO, was born in 1995. Its headquarters located in Geneva of Switzerland. The goal of WTO is to ensure that trade follows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. By the end of 2008, WTO has 164 members, which representing 98% of world trade. How about China? China has 4 positions in the WTO. They are China, Hong Kong of China, Macau of China, and the Chinese Taipei. Even WTO was born on January 1st, 1995, but its history can be traced back to 1948. In June of 1948, GATT, that's General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, also the predecessor of WTO, came into force and provided the rules for world trade system. However, GATT was just a provisional agreement, not a formal organization. The GATT has organized serious rounds of negotiations. In the early years, the GATT trade rounds concentrated on further reduction tariffs. Then, the Kennedy round in the mid-60s brought about anti-dumping issues. The Tokyo round during the 70s started to talk about no-tariff barriers. During the Uruguay round, which started in 1986 and ended in 1994, the members of GATT discussed and later decided to create one formal organization to regulate the world trade. That's WTO. And its coverage expanded from trade of goods to trade in service and trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. After the establishment of WTO, nearly every 2 years, it will have one time of minister meeting, which is the highest decision-making mechanism of the WTO. WTO also organizes round negotiations. The first round negotiation organized by WTO is the Doha Development Round, which has been triggered in 2001. Well, unfortunately, even more than 17 years passed, the Doha round hasn't come to the end until now. How to understand the WTO? Somebody says it's a radio. The radio tells the members what they can do. Somebody says it's just a table. All the members sit around the table and negotiate. To some degree, they are right, but not very accurate. Here, we will talk about how to understand the WTO scientifically. Firstly, WTO is a negotiation forum for member governments to sort out the trade problems they face with each other or for them to coordinate trade policies. It's inevitable that countries will meet lots of problems when they trade with each other. When the problems arise, the first step is to talk, to negotiate. The WTO itself also was born out of negotiations, and everything the WTO does is the result of negotiations. Why do we need talk or coordination? We can explain it with the game theory model which is shown in Table 2. In Table 2, we assume there are 2 countries. One is the United States, and the other is Japan. And both of the 2 countries have 2 choices. One is protection, and the other is free trade. When USA choose free trade, then if Japan choose free trade also, both of them will get 10 units benefit. Well, if Japan choose protection, then USA will lose 10 units, and Japan get 20 units. If USA choose protection, then if Japan choose protection also, both of them will lose 5. However, if Japan choose free trade, then USA will get 20, while Japan will lose 10. So, with basic knowledge of game theory from Table 2, it's clear for us to get to know that if we let the two countries to act by themselves without communication and coordination, both of the two countries will choose protection, and both of them lost fight. Of course, this is not a good result. We call this case as a prisoner's dilemma. However, if we can provide one forum for the two countries to communicate and coordinate with each other, it is very reasonable for both of the two countries to choose free trade, and both of them can benefit then. The result is win-win. It's obviously acceptable for both of the two countries. From this, we can find that the coordination forum is very important for the game players. WTO is just such kind of coordination forum. From this point, we can find that WTO is too important for global trade liberalization and for the welfare of all the members. Secondly, WTO is a set of rules. In fact, WTO is a rule-based system. Its heart are serialized agreements. These agreements are often called the WTO's trade rules. These documents provide the legal ground, rules for the international commerce. The basis of the present WTO trade is the Uruguay-Round agreements. The table of contents of the result of the Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiations, the legal texts, is a daunting list of about 60 agreements, annexes, decisions, and understandings. The agreements fall into a simple structure with 6 main parts. There are the umbrella agreement, that's the Marrakesh Agreement established the WTO. Agreements for each of the 3 broad areas of the trade that the WTO covers, that's goods, services, and intellectual property. The last 2 are agreements about dispute settlement and the reviews of government's trade policies. Among these, the most important are the 3 agreements dealing with goods, services, and the intellectual property separately. More accurately, they are GATT, that's General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATS, that's General Agreement on Trade in Services, and the CHIPS, that's the Agreement on Trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. To some degree, they can be viewed as the 3 pillars of the WTO. Covered by these 3 general agreements, especially GATT and GATS, there are a series of detailed agreements. For example, Agriculture Agreement, Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures Agreement, Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, Agreement on Subsidies and Cultivating Measures, and so on. Even Uruguay Round agreements is the basis of WTO trade rules. Is not all. Besides this, the WTO still has lots of other agreements. For example, the 2 plurilateral agreements that are not signed by all members. One is about civil aircraft, and the other is about government procurement. On 2013 Bali Minister meeting, the members have signed an important agreement, that's Trade Facilitation Agreement, which is the first multilateral agreement since the establishment of the WTO. Thirdly, WTO hopes to settle disputes. It's very sure that world trade relations often involve conflicts. As for this, triggering trade war is not a good choice. The most harmless way to deal with this is through some neutral procedure based on an agreed legal foundation. WTO just provides such kind of mechanism. That's DSB, Dispute Settlement Body. Dispute Settlement Body is the central pillar of the multilateral trading system, and the WTO's unique contribution to the stability of the global economy. Without the DSB, the World Trade Organization cannot be so powerful because the rules and the agreements could not be enforced. Dispute settlement procedure also existed in the old GATT time, but in WTO system, the dispute settlement mechanism is more effective because it introduced clear discipline for the length of time a case should take to be settled, with flexible deadlines set in various stages of the procedure. WTO emphasizes that prompt settlement is essential if the WTO is to function effectively. It set out in considerable detail the procedures and the timetable to be followed in resolving disputes. If a case runs its full course to a first ruling, it should not normally take more than about 1 year. If the case is appealed, it can be longer, but usually not exceed 15 months. Fourthly, WTO conducts trade policy reviews. The trade policy review is another important mechanism of WTO. As we all know, WTO is a rule-based organization. At the heart of WTO is a set of agreements, which include members' commitments. In fact, WTO's agreements and the members' commitments are too complex and too long. Under such conditions, without a review of scrutinizing mechanism, it is difficult for the WTO to make sure every member abides by the agreement and their own commitments. From this point, the trade policy review mechanism also important, just as WTO's trade dispute settlement mechanism. According with the agreement, over a period of time, all WTO members are to come under scrutiny. The frequency of the reviews depends on the country's size. The 4 biggest traders are examined approximately once every 2 years. The next 16 countries are reviewed every 4 years. The remaining countries are reviewed every 6 years, with the possibility of a longer interim period for the least developed countries. So, based on what we have talked about, we can conclude the WTO into 1, 2, 3, where 1 stands for one function, that's to organize negotiation. 2 means 2 mechanisms. They are trade dispute settlement mechanism and the trade policy review mechanism. 3 refers the most important 3 agreements. They are General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, General Agreement on Trade in Services, and the Agreement on Trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. But after all, we need to point out that even WTO is important. It's just one of the international organizations. As for some issues, for example, the issues about trade and the environment, or the issues about trade and intellectual property rights, WTO still needs to cooperate with other international organizations.